The air in the hangar was cold and sharp, with the scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone. It was a sterile, cavernous space, brightly lit by sodium lamps that hummed a constant, low-frequency note. In the center of the polished concrete floor, a Bell 429 helicopter lay in a state of careful dissection. Its fuselage rested on stands, panels removed. The twin engines were cradled nearby, and the main rotor assembly was laid out on a series of blue tarps, each component tagged and placed with geometric precision. It looked less like a machine and more like an autopsy. Elias Vance stood alone, his back to the crowd of executives and engineers. He wore simple gray coveralls, the name Vance stitched in faded blue thread over his breast pocket. He was a tall man, with a quiet stillness that seemed to absorb the hangar's nervous energy. His hands, clean but etched with the fine lines of a life spent with tools, hung loosely at his sides. Facing him, at the head of the assembled staff, was Evelyn Reed. She was the chief executive officer of Reed Aeronautics, a company her father had built from a single garage into an industry leader. She was sharp, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than Elias's car, and her expression was a mask of corporate control. Beside her, Marcus Thorne, the vice president of operations, wore a smirk that was both condescending and triumphant. "The proposal is simple, Mr. Vance," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the hangar's hum. She projected an air of challenge, of a leader testing a subordinate in a very public forum. "Mr. Thorne has assured me that our procedures are so streamlined, so foolproof, that any competent mechanic should be able to execute them under pressure. You, however, have questioned those procedures." Elias said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the disassembled machine. "So we will have a demonstration," Evelyn continued, her voice hardening. "You will reassemble this aircraft, every system, every component, to full flight-ready status. You have 1 hour." She paused, letting the impossibility of the task settle over the room. A murmur went through the crowd of mechanics standing at the back. It was a 2-day job for a full team of 3. For one man, it was a joke. Thorne leaned in and whispered something to her. She nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "And to make it interesting," Evelyn announced, her voice ringing with finality, "I will wager $1 million of my own money that you cannot do it." The hangar fell silent. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. Thorne's smirk widened. He had won. He had maneuvered the quiet, stubborn mechanic into a position of absolute public humiliation. Elias Vance finally turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Evelyn Reed's for a brief, unblinking moment. He did not speak. He did not argue or protest. He simply gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "The clock starts now," Evelyn declared. "If you have ever been underestimated, judged by your appearance, or had your skills questioned by someone who couldn't do a fraction of your job, you need to stay with this one until the end." 3 weeks earlier, the world had been a much quieter place. Elias's apartment was a small, clean 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a walk-up. It was a space defined by order and purpose. Books were shelved by subject, not size. The few pictures on the wall were perfectly level. In the living room, his 10-year-old daughter, Maya, was frowning at a complex Lego model of the Saturn V rocket. "It won't fit, Dad," she said, her voice a knot of frustration. "The instructions say this piece goes here, but it just doesn't." Elias knelt beside her on the floor. He didn't look at the instruction booklet. He looked at the structure she had built, his eyes tracing the lines of the plastic bricks, seeing not just the individual pieces, but the entire system. He picked up the small, problematic component. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling its precise, molded shape. "You're right," he said softly. "It doesn't fit." He pointed to a section 3 stages lower down. "Because this support strut, right here, is turned 180 degrees the wrong way. It looks almost the same, but the receiving peg is a millimeter off-center." Maya's eyes widened as she saw it. "How did you see that?" "You look at the whole machine," Elias said, gently helping her disassemble the incorrect section. "Not just the one piece that's giving you trouble. Everything is connected." They worked together for another hour, their movements synchronized and efficient, until the completed rocket stood tall and perfect on the living room rug. Maya beamed, her earlier frustration forgotten, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved correctly. That same methodical patience was what defined Elias at work. At Reed Aeronautics, he was a senior airframe and power plant mechanic, one of the best, though few in management would have known it. He was not a man who advertised his skills. He simply performed his duties with a level of precision that bordered on art. He was assigned the final inspection and airworthiness sign-off for N429RA, the company's new Bell 429 demonstrator, a machine destined for a high-profile client. The pressure to deliver was immense. Marcus Thorne made sure everyone felt it. Thorne was a man who saw machines as numbers on a balance sheet and mechanics as interchangeable cogs in a process he had designed. He strode through the hangar with an air of impatient authority, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete. "Vance," he said, stopping at Elias's workstation without making eye contact, instead staring at the helicopter. "The client is getting anxious. I need your signature on the logbooks by end of day. The ferry pilot is scheduled for tomorrow at 0800. "I'm still running diagnostics on the number 2 engine turbine," Elias replied, his voice calm and even. He was preparing a borescope, its fiber optic cable coiled like a snake. "Should be done in a few hours." Thorne sighed, a theatrical sound of exasperation. "It's a brand new engine from Pratt & Whitney, certified at the factory. We ran it on the test stand for an hour. It's fine. We're not building a watch here. Just sign the logs." "I sign when the inspection is complete," Elias said, not looking up. "Not before." Thorne's jaw tightened. He saw insubordination where Elias saw procedure. He saw a delay where Elias saw diligence. He stared at the back of Elias's head for a long moment before turning and walking away, his sharp footsteps echoing his displeasure. Later that day, Evelyn Reed conducted one of her regular walkthroughs of the facility. She moved with a purpose that her father had instilled in her, a belief that a leader needed to see the work, not just read the reports. She was intelligent, with a keen eye for business, but she had inherited the company, not built it. She had never turned a wrench. She relied on her senior staff, on men like Thorne, to translate the complex world of mechanics into the simpler language of profit and loss. She saw Elias, a solitary figure hunched over an engine, his focus absolute. She saw a mechanic. She noted the aircraft number, N429RA, and recalled Thorne's report from the morning meeting. On schedule for delivery, no issues. She saw the scene, but she did not understand the story playing out within it. She nodded to the floor manager and continued her tour, the image of the quiet mechanic fading from her mind as she turned her attention to quarterly earnings projections. The machine of the company was vast, and some parts were too small to warrant close inspection. The borescope display glowed with the alien landscape of the engine's interior. Elias guided the flexible probe deeper into the turbine section, his movements slow and deliberate. He was looking for imperfections, nicks, scratches, any sign of wear that might indicate a problem. The engine was, as Thorne had said, brand new. The components were clean, the tolerances perfect. It was a pristine million-dollar piece of engineering. He was about to retract the scope when a flicker of light caught his eye. It was anomalous, a reflection that did not belong. He adjusted the articulation of the camera, zooming in. He followed the flicker to its source, the leading edge of a single compressor blade in the third stage. He increased the magnification, and then he saw it. They were not scratches, they were fractures. Microscopic hairline cracks, like tiny lightning bolts spiderwebbing across the superalloy surface. They were almost invisible, the kind of defect that a less patient man, a man in a hurry, would have missed entirely. But they were there. Under the incredible stress of high RPM rotation and extreme temperatures, these tiny cracks could propagate. A blade could separate. The result would be a catastrophic, uncontained engine failure. He felt a cold stillness settle in his gut. This was not possible. The part logs, certified by the manufacturer and triple-checked by Reed's own quality control, showed this specific blade had passed every metallurgical scan and stress test. The data said the blade was perfect. The borescope said the data was wrong. Elias retracted the scope and methodically documented his findings. He took high-resolution images, logged the exact location, and cross-referenced the blade's serial number. Then he took a heavy red tag from his toolbox. On it, he wrote in clear block letters, "Aircraft unairworthy. Do not operate." He secured the tag to the engine's control linkage, an unmistakable symbol that this machine was going nowhere. He reported his findings to his immediate supervisor, a weary man named Dave, who had learned long ago not to make waves. Dave's face went pale as he looked at the images. "Thorne is going to have a fit," he muttered. "You need to take this to him." The meeting took place in Thorne's glass-walled office, which overlooked the hangar floor. Thorne did not look at the tablet Elias offered him. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, steepling his fingers.
"Let me get this straight, Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are claiming that a multi-million-dollar component, which has passed every quality check from one of the world's leading aerospace manufacturers, is flawed. You are claiming that our own receiving inspectors, my people, missed this, and you are doing this the day before a critical delivery, based on a shadow you think you saw on a tiny screen." "I have the images," Elias said, his voice flat. "The fractures are there. The aircraft is not safe to fly." "What you have is an overactive imagination," Thorne snapped, his voice rising. "Those are cosmetic imperfections, tool marks from the manufacturing process. They're meaningless. You're holding up a $10 million deal because you don't know how to read a borescope." "I know what I see," Elias stated. It was not an argument. It was a fact. Thorne stood up, his face flushed with anger. "This is insubordination. I am ordering you to remove that red tag and sign the logbook. This aircraft is shipping tomorrow, with or without your approval. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Elias said, "but I won't sign it." He placed the tablet with the evidence on Thorne's desk, turned, and walked out of the office. He did not need to see Thorne's expression to know he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had chosen the machine over the men who ran the company. The delay of N429RA was the first item on the agenda at the next day's executive meeting. Thorne presented the situation with practiced ease. "We've encountered a minor, last-minute technical snag," he explained to Evelyn Reed and the board. "One of our mechanics has flagged a non-issue with a turbine blade. He's being overly cautious, likely looking to pad his overtime hours before the end of the quarter." Evelyn frowned. "A non-issue? What kind of non-issue grounds an entire aircraft?" "He claims to have found stress fractures on a brand new component," Thorne said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I've reviewed his findings. They're inconclusive at best. More likely, they're tool marks that he's misinterpreting. It's a classic case of a technician overstepping his expertise." "And this mechanic's name?" Evelyn asked, tapping her pen on her notepad. "Vance. Elias Vance." Something about the situation felt wrong to Evelyn. Thorne's explanation was smooth, plausible, but it was also too neat. It dismissed a serious safety concern with an ad hominem attack on the mechanic's motives. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a phrase he had repeated so often it had become a family mantra. "Trust the hands, not the suits. The metal never lies." "I want to see his full report," Evelyn said, "and I want the raw data from his borescope. Send it to my office." Thorne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Evelyn. I'll have a summary prepared for you immediately." He provided a summary, not the raw data. The report he sent to her office was a carefully curated document. It included a low-resolution image of the blade, where the fractures were nearly invisible, and attached a statement from the manufacturer's representative, a friend of Thorne's, attesting that such markings were common and benign. It was a masterful piece of corporate deception, designed to reassure and deflect. But Thorne knew that as long as Elias Vance was there, the truth was a threat. The quiet mechanic was a loose thread that could unravel everything.
He needed to be removed, not just from the project, but from the company. He needed to be discredited so thoroughly that no one would ever listen to him again. That evening, long after the hangar had emptied, Marcus Thorne sat in his office, the glow of his monitor illuminating his face. He was not looking at delivery schedules or profit margins. He was logged into the company's human resources database, reviewing Elias Vance's entire personnel file. For a man so meticulous, his record was nearly spotless. It was a testament to a career of quiet competence. But nearly spotless was not perfect. Thorne found it on page 7 of the digital file, an incident from 2 years prior, a minor infraction report. Vance had misplaced a calibrated torque wrench. He had reported it himself immediately, and the tool was found less than an hour later, having fallen behind a toolbox. No harm was done, but the event was logged as per procedure. It was a small thing, a loose thread. Thorne opened a second window on his computer, the digital maintenance log system. This was the heart of the company's airworthiness records, a system built on the principle of immutable time-stamped entries. It was designed to be tamper-proof, but Thorne was a system administrator. He had the digital keys to the kingdom. He navigated to the maintenance records for a different aircraft, one Elias had worked on 6 months ago. He found an entry where Elias had torqued the retaining bolts on a main rotor blade grip. The entry was routine, unremarkable. With a few keystrokes, Thorne began to weave his lie. He created a new, backdated log entry. The entry stated that a subsequent inspection had found that the bolts on that rotor grip had been torqued improperly, some over-tightened, some under. He wrote that the cause was determined to be the use of an uncalibrated wrench. Then he fabricated the most damning part, a corrective action report stating that mechanic Elias Vance had falsified the original log entry to conceal his use of the non-compliant tool. It was a lie constructed from a scaffolding of truth. The misplaced wrench incident was real. The original log entry was real, but the narrative he built around them was pure fiction. It was a story designed to paint Elias not just as incompetent, but as dishonest. In aviation, there was no greater sin. It was a career-ending accusation. He saved the entry. The system, as designed, time-stamped his action. But he knew no one would ever look that deep. They would only see the damning report now permanently attached to Elias Vance's name. The next morning, Elias was called into a meeting. Thorne was there, along with a woman from Human Resources and his supervisor, Dave, who refused to meet his eyes. Thorne did not waste time with pleasantries. He projected the falsified maintenance log onto the screen in the conference room. "Mr. Vance, we have discovered a serious breach of protocol. 6 months ago, you knowingly used an uncalibrated tool on a critical flight component and then falsified the records to cover your tracks." Elias looked at the screen. He saw the log entry, his name, the accusation. He saw the lie, so seamlessly integrated with reality it was almost believable. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if the solid ground of procedure and integrity he had built his life on had suddenly turned to sand. "That's not true," he said, his voice quiet. "The records say it is," Thorne countered, gesturing to the screen. "The digital log is immutable. Are you calling the system a liar?" "I am telling you I did not do that. Your history of mishandling calibrated tools is already documented," Thorne pressed, pulling up the old report about the misplaced wrench. "It establishes a pattern of negligence." Elias saw the trap closing. He saw the cold, detached expression on the HR representative's face. He saw the shame in Dave's eyes. He was being erased. His 2 decades of flawless work undone by a few dozen kilobytes of false data. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending an investigation," the HR woman said, reading from a script. "Please turn in your security badge." Elias stood up. He unclipped the badge from his coveralls and placed it on the polished table. It made a soft, plastic sound. He looked at Thorne, whose face was a mask of feigned regret. Then he turned and walked out of the room, out of the building, and away from the only career he had known since he left the military. He did not protest further. The system had already rendered its verdict. Arguing with a lie only gave it more oxygen. The problem of Elias Vance was solved. The delay of N429RA was no longer an issue. Thorne brought in a more compliant mechanic who, under pressure, signed off on the logbooks without performing his own borescope inspection. The red tag was removed. The helicopter was cleared for delivery. Thorne's timeline was back on track. His victory was complete. But for Evelyn Reed, the seed of doubt that had been planted earlier now began to sprout. The neatness of it all was what bothered her. A problem employee who was causing a costly delay was suddenly and conveniently discovered to have committed a fireable offense just in the nick of time. It was too perfect. It felt less like a discovery and more like a script. She sat in her father's old office, surrounded by models of the aircraft he had designed. She remembered him talking about the feel of a problem. Numbers can be made to say anything, he used to tell her. A lie can be dressed up to look like a report. But the truth has a certain weight. You learn to feel it. She was feeling the absence of that weight now. Thorne's reports felt light, hollow. On a hunch, she called the head of the IT department, a man named Arthur Finch. Finch was a quiet, unassuming man who had been with the company for 30 years. He had been hired by her father and possessed an almost fanatical loyalty to the founder's principles. "Arthur," she said, closing her office door, "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it off the record." She asked him to pull the full server access logs for the maintenance database, not the user-facing records, but the deep system logs that recorded every single keystroke, every login, every modification from any terminal in the company. She wanted to see exactly who accessed Elias Vance's file and when. An hour later, Arthur called her back. His voice was grim. "You were right to ask, Evelyn. Someone created a new log entry in the historical record for an aircraft Vance worked on. The entry was created 2 nights ago at 10:47 p.m. It was backdated to appear 6 months old." "Where was the entry made from?" Evelyn asked, her heart pounding slowly. "The IP address traces back to the hardwired Ethernet port in Marcus Thorne's office." There it was, the smoking gun, the truth, stripped of all its corporate jargon and plausible deniability. It was a simple, ugly fact. Thorne had not discovered a problem, he had created one. He had framed a good man to cover up a potentially fatal defect in a $10 million machine. That evening, Evelyn Reed drove her car not to her expensive home in the hills, but to the address listed in Elias Vance's file. She found his modest apartment building and walked up the 3 flights of stairs. She hesitated at his door, suddenly aware of the chasm between her world and his. She was the one who had let this happen. Her insulated position, her trust in the wrong people, had led to this injustice. She knocked. Elias opened the door. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. He showed no surprise at seeing her. He simply waited. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice more uncertain than she had intended. "May I come in?" He led her through the quiet, orderly apartment to a small, attached garage. The space was as clean as a surgical suite. In the center, the disassembled engine of a vintage 1970s motorcycle was laid out on a workbench. Every component, pistons, valves, bearings, was cleaned and arranged in perfect order. He was in the process of honing a cylinder with the same focused intensity she had seen in the hangar. This was his real world, a world of tangible things, of mechanics and tolerances, where the truth was measured in thousandths of an inch. "They told me you were suspended," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. He wiped his hands on a clean rag. "They were wrong," Evelyn said. "I was wrong. I let it happen." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Vance, I know what Thorne did. I have proof that he falsified your records. He did it to silence you about the turbine blade in the 429. Elias nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He had known, of course. He had known the moment he saw the fabricated log. "The helicopter is scheduled for delivery to the client tomorrow morning," Evelyn continued. "Thorne's man signed off on it. As we speak, it is considered airworthy." A heavy silence filled the small garage. The implications of her words hung in the air. A flawed machine was about to be put into service, all to protect one man's career and one quarter's delivery numbers. "I am going to fix this," Evelyn said, her voice now firm, resolute. "But I need your help. I can't just fire Thorne. I need to do it in a way that rips out the culture he has created by the roots. I need to show the entire company what real competence looks like, and what happens when you bet against it." She laid out her plan. It was audacious, theatrical, and incredibly risky. It hinged entirely on him, on the skills that no one in her executive suite had ever bothered to see. Elias listened, his gaze fixed on the motorcycle engine. He looked at the perfectly honed cylinder in his hand, a piece of metal he had restored to a state of flawless function. He thought of Maya, sleeping in her room. He thought of the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. "All right," he said. It was the only word he needed to say. An alliance was formed, not between a CEO and a mechanic, but between two people who, for very different reasons, now had to fight for the soul of the same company. The next morning, the main hangar at Reed Aeronautics was buzzing. An all-hands meeting for the entire technical and executive staff had been called with less than an hour's notice. Marcus Thorne stood near the front, preening, accepting congratulations from his peers for getting the N429RA delivery back on track. He assumed the meeting was to announce the successful shipment. Evelyn Reed stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Today we are going to have a practical demonstration of our commitment to excellence." On her signal, the main hangar doors rolled open. A flatbed truck reversed into the hangar, carrying the disassembled Bell 429. It was the same aircraft Elias had grounded. An independent team of FAA-certified mechanics had worked through the night, stripping it down to its major components, just as she had instructed. Thorne's smile vanished. He stared at the dismantled helicopter, a knot of confusion and dread tightening in his stomach. This was not part of his script. Evelyn gestured to Elias Vance, who walked out from the side of the hangar and came to a stop near the aircraft. He was wearing his gray coveralls. He looked calm, centered. And then Evelyn made her announcement, her voice ringing with a cold fury that only Thorne seemed to understand. She spoke of procedures, of competence, of the difference between theory and practice. She framed the entire event as a test, a challenge, and she made her bet. $1 million, 1 hour. Thorne was trapped. He was the champion of the company's procedures. He had publicly declared that any competent mechanic could do the work. To object now would be to admit his own hypocrisy. He had to play along, forced to watch the public humiliation he had designed for Elias now be turned back on him. He smirked, a desperate, brittle expression, believing the task was so impossible that Elias would fail, and he would be vindicated anyway. The large digital clock on the hangar wall was reset to 60 minutes and began to count down. Elias moved. There was no wasted motion. He did not rush, yet he moved with a speed that was mesmerizing. His hands flowed over the components, a blur of practiced efficiency. He started with the engines, his first actions being to reinstall the complex fuel control units and ignition systems. His tools were laid out on a small roll cart, and he picked them up and put them down without looking. His muscle memory absolute. The executives watched, initially bored, checking their phones. But the mechanics, the engineers, the men and women who actually did the work, they were captivated. They saw something they had never witnessed before. It was not just speed. It was a deep, intuitive understanding of the machine. It was a conversation between man and metal. Ben, an older mechanic who had always respected Elias's quiet work, moved to his side, wordlessly handing him a wrench or a socket just a moment before he needed it. A silent, supportive partner in the unfolding drama. Elias moved from the engines to the transmission, hoisting it into place with a small, portable crane. He torqued the mounting bolts in a precise star pattern, his movements rhythmic and exact. Thorne watched, his face growing paler with every passing minute. The smirk was long gone, replaced by a sheen of cold sweat. He was watching a master at work, and he was realizing, with sickening certainty, that he had bet against a force of nature. Evelyn stood motionless, her arms crossed. Her gamble, her company, her future, It was all riding on this man. The man she had allowed her subordinate to discard like a broken tool. She felt a profound sense of awe and a deeper sense of shame. With the main rotor head installed, Elias moved to the cockpit, connecting the complex avionics harnesses. His fingers danced through the web of wires, connecting dozens of multi-pin connectors with a speed and accuracy that was baffling. He was not following a checklist, he was the checklist. Finally, with the main fuselage panels being secured by Ben, Elias performed the final, critical task, tracking and balancing the main rotor blades. It was a delicate procedure that usually took hours. He did it in 6 minutes. He secured the last panel, stepped back, and picked up a single, clean rag from his cart. He wiped his hands, the job complete. He looked up at the clock. 13 minutes remained. He had finished in 47 minutes. The hangar was utterly silent. No one moved. Elias looked at Evelyn and gave the same small, simple nod he had given at the beginning. The company's chief test pilot, a man who answered only to Evelyn, climbed into the cockpit. The entire pre-flight check was broadcast on the giant screens in the hangar. Every system check came back green. The engines spooled up with a clean, perfect whine. The blades began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, until they were a transparent, shimmering disc. The pilot gave a crisp thumbs up. The machine was perfect. Evelyn Reed stepped forward, her voice shaking with controlled emotion. 47 minutes. She let the fact hang in the air. It seems that mastery is not just rare, it is right here. She turned, her gaze locking on to Marcus Thorne. And now I will tell you why we are really here. She gestured to the main screen. The image of the helicopter's cockpit vanished, replaced by the IT server logs Arthur Finch had uncovered. Line by line, in cold, irrefutable detail, she exposed the entire fraud. She showed the time-stamped entry from Thorne's office. She explained the lie, the frame-up, the motive. Then, she showed them the final piece of evidence, a new high-resolution image of the turbine blade from the second engine, the one Thorne had tried to hide. It was now displayed in a glass case, the microscopic cracks highlighted in red. This, Evelyn said, her voice like ice, is what he was willing to kill for. This is the truth he tried to bury. He did not just try to ruin a man's career. He put the lives of our clients, our pilots, and the reputation of this entire company at risk, all to meet a deadline. 2 uniformed security guards approached Thorne. His face was ashen, his arrogance shattered. He was no longer a powerful executive. He was just a man, exposed and defeated. He was escorted from the hangar, the silent stares of his former colleagues following him out the door. Evelyn turned back to Elias. In front of the entire company, she offered a direct and profound apology. She announced his immediate reinstatement, a full back payment of his salary, and a public clearing of his name. Later, in her office, the adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving a quiet, reflective atmosphere. She offered Elias the vacant position, Vice President of Operations. He considered it for a moment before shaking his head. With respect, ma'am, that's not my job. I'm a mechanic. I belong with the machines, not in meetings. He then made a counter-proposal. Create a new position, Chief of Quality and Safety Assurance, an independent role. I report only to you. I have the authority to ground any aircraft for any reason and to override any manager on any matter of safety. No questions asked. Let me build a team that values integrity over schedules. Evelyn looked at him, seeing not just a mechanic, but a leader. He was not asking for power, but for responsibility. It was a far better idea than hers. It did not just fix the problem of Thorne, it fixed the system that had allowed a man like Thorne to thrive. Agreed, she said without hesitation. The Vance mandate became company law. A cultural shift began, slow and difficult at first, but real. The focus moved from delivery dates to diligence. The mechanics on the floor felt the change first. They walked taller, knowing they had a voice, knowing that their integrity would be defended at the highest level. 3 months later, Elias was in his garage. The old motorcycle was fully restored, its chrome gleaming under the dim light. Maya sat at a small workbench nearby, carefully assembling a model aircraft engine of her own. A car pulled into the driveway. It was Evelyn Reed. She was not dressed as a CEO, but in jeans and a simple sweater. She carried 2 cups of coffee. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Just wanted to see how the new department was settling in." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, sipping the coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The quiet of his life no longer felt like a retreat from the world, but like its solid, unmoving center.
"No one ever asked," she said softly. "Before you came here, 22 years, what did you do?" Elias looked at the perfectly restored engine of the motorcycle, a machine brought back from neglect and decay by his own 2 hands. "I was a crew chief," he said, "for the Army's 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. She knew who they were. They flew the most advanced, secret helicopters in the world, in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Keeping those machines flying was a sacred, life-or-death responsibility. "So, rebuilding a brand new 429 in a clean, well-lit hangar," she began. A rare, genuine smile touched Elias's lips. That was a slow Tuesday. They shared the smile, a moment of understanding that transcended their different worlds. The company was on a better path. His daughter was safe and happy. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt like a well-built machine, its components in perfect balance, ready for whatever came next.